Hello and welcome to Industrialization. This is a brand new unit. We are in Guided Notes 10.1, and for this particular guided notes we are focusing on industrialization specifically in Europe. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's your vocabulary, and we're going to talk about things as you see here: industrialization, socialism, urbanization. So take the time now to pause your video and get these vocabulary words down in your guided notes. Alright, so let's talk about industrialization in Britain. So the Industrial Revolution began in Manchester, Great Britain in the late 18th century, which is about the late 1700s. And it did because of these four factors, as you see here. The agricultural revolution increased the food supply. So that means that agriculturally, farmers were learning about new methods in order to grow more crops, and when they were able to grow more crops, that increased the food supply, and when that increased the food supply, more people, there's a population boom, right? And it's also, as you see here, lessened traditional labor and allowed for British families to spend more money on manufactured goods. Also, the population grew, as I mentioned, because of this increased food supply. So based on that agricultural revolution, population grew, right? Also, Britain had a ready supply of capital to invest in these new machines. So they had the money. So again, landowners, farmers, they were able to have the assets or the money to invest in these new types of machines, right? And also the supply of markets gave British manufacturers an increased demand to sell their goods. So because different markets around the world, in terms of their needs, that growing demand for cotton, that led British manufacturers to increase their production and find different ways to make sure that they can increase it. So those are the four factors. So as you see here, the use of the steam engine in factories increased the demand for coal, and coal production also rose too. And because coal was used to produce iron, high quality iron, now they can build these new machines. And as you see here, Henry Court did this process called puddling, and that produced high quality iron, which is going to be used later for steel. But also, Richard Trevithick, who was an English engineer, built the first steam locomotive, and it began running on a rail line in 1804. Now, with this being created, this locomotive or a train, right? Now, goods from the farm can be transported to different areas much cheaper, right? And more people are able to buy goods because there's more factories, and then also with this transportation of the railway, they can transport goods to different places much faster and much easier. So because of all of that, population began to boom, right? The development of the factory system really changed the labor practices. And as you see here, the population doubled in Europe between 1750 and 1850. And because of that, there was a process called urbanization. And urbanization, as you see here, was when people moved from the country where the farms were into cities, because cities looked like what this picture that you see here. However, that many people moving into these cities, it caused poor living conditions, because as you see here, things are quite cramped, right? And urban reformers called on the governments to try and improve conditions in the city, but that didn't take place until later in the century. Also, because of the Industrial Revolution, there was two new social classes, or socioeconomic classes that came about, and that came through from industrial capitalism, right? And industrial capitalism is one of your vocabulary words, as we mentioned. But the two new classes that came about was the industrial middle class, and those are the people who built the factories. They owned the factories. They developed the products and markets, such as the cotton industry and so forth. And they bought the machines in order to do it. So they were gaining wealth and they were gaining power, right? But then you also had the industrial working class, and they worked, as you see here, 12 hours each day, 6 days a week. Only Sundays were off. If you did our simulation, the urban game, you will remember that, right? And they didn't have a promise for future employment, nor did they have health insurance. Those conditions, working in the coal mines and the cotton mills, were very dangerous and very poor, unhealthy conditions. So the working class had it really hard. And as you see here, social classes were also developed in terms of children and women. As a matter of fact, in Britain, the Factory Act of 1833 was passed, and that set working hours for children, and it actually forbid the employment of children under the age of 9. Now, why was this implemented, or why was this passed? In Britain, many of the women died in the cotton mills because their hair or parts of their dress or parts of their aprons and so forth would get caught in the gears, and they would die because, of course, they got caught. Children, as you see here, this is a 15-year-old young lady in, I believe it was New York City. She just got out of the hospital. She was 15 years old. And some children was younger than her. They were so small and tired from working from those hours, their limbs would get caught in the gears. And oftentimes they were mutilated, as you see here for this young lady. Her index finger got mutilated, so she had to go to the hospital, or many of them died, as you see here. So in continental Europe, in Britain, the Industrial Revolution was fast and it was very quick. Industrialization really spread very fast and quickly, and Britain prospered for it. However, in other places, it spread to other nations, but in France, it did not spread very quickly, mainly because political instability. Remember that France was still going through that process of the French Revolution, and also that corruption of the Directory, Napoleon becoming emperor and so forth. So they were still trying to figure things out, in terms of their government. Also, they did not have a good source of coal to fuel factories or to fuel railroads. So because of not having that coal, France was not able to progress in industrialization as quickly as Britain did. However, the German states that, remember, they kind of started to unify, right? Especially Prussia was able to take advantage of those coal and iron resources because they had plenty of it. And that accelerated the unification, right? Or the nationalism and unification of Germany. And that accelerated their industrialization. And now Germany, as a nation state or a country, is going to become a powerful industrial nation in the 1900s. And that's going to propel them to be imperialistic as well. We're going to talk about what imperialism is later. So here's Henry Bessemer, and I'm hoping I'm saying this right. Bessemer, he patented a new process for making high quality steel. He took molten pig iron, and that was called the Bessemer process. So now steel replaces iron, and that becomes lighter, it's smaller, it's faster, and now they can use that in their engines, in their locomotives, in their machines. And now industry is going to move even quicker and faster to produce the goods that people are demanding, right? So again, because of the steel industry starting to pick up speed, the industrial production just started to become rapid. And now the wages for workers increase in the 1870s. And because of stuff like the railway, as you see here, the prices for manufactured goods are going to be lower because now there's transportation. The transportation cost of getting things from place to place is reduced, right? And it's faster and it's quicker. So think of it like this. When we had the pandemic and there was no access to the ships, and the ships were not able to transport goods as quickly as they could because of COVID restrictions, remember that the price of goods went up, right? So think about that, and then think about what we're talking about here. How does that link, and how is that similar to what we're talking about here, and how is it different? Okay, think about that and answer that in Edpuzzle as well. All right, so there's an economic theory of socialism, and it came about because of the poor conditions that was developed in the working systems, or the factory systems, and people, the working class working in those systems in Europe. So in a socialist society, the government owns and controls the means of production, and that means that they are the ones that control the factories. The government, they control the transportation. The government owns and they operate that, right? However, the ideals of the socialist movement did influence European governments. So things that we have today, right, such as pension, meaning retirement, and unemployment insurance, meaning that if you get fired, you still can get a small, not small, but it could be a decent check because you got unemployed. You got, not fired, but you got let go, right? Because of certain circumstances. They would be able to give you a severance or an insurance pay because you became unemployed. So those things are socialist programs put in place by the government to ensure that a worker is taken care of regardless of what happens to them while they are working. All right, so also remember that we mentioned that there was a big desire for the working class to improve their working conditions and their living conditions, especially living in the city. So many of them began to form socialist political parties and also trade unions because they wanted to balance the wealth. They noticed that they're working so long hours, they're working very hard, as you see here in this picture with the coal miners, and they're not seeing the wealth for it. So their thing is that the social economic classes need to be balanced, and this was all an idea based on Karl Marx, which is what we're going to get to here. According to Karl Marx, who was a philosopher, economic philosopher, and political theorist, he believed that the oppressors, or the bourgeoisie, right? The bourgeois, we talked about them before. They owned all of the land, the raw materials, the money, right? He felt that they were the oppressors, and they were able to control the government and society because they owned and operated the money, the assets, the capital, the land, etc. The oppressed, which was the proletariat, owned nothing at all, and they're the ones that provide the production. They are the ones that's working to make sure that the bourgeoisie, or the oppressors, had the wealth, had the money, had the assets, right? So Karl Marx figured that there's going to be a continual struggle between these two groups, and it's finally going to lead up to a revolution where the proletariat might overtake the bourgeoisie, or there's going to be some form of a classless society where there is no class at all. There's no working class, there's no upper class, there's no aristocrats, none of that. He figured there's going to be something where the government just controls everything and there's no such thing as a class. So that's where trade unions came in. So another force for the revolution, or revolutionary change for working class citizens, was trade unions, and they unified and came together. I'm talking about those that worked in the factories and so forth, to improve their wages and the working conditions. So they organized these unions, and one of their biggest methods was the right to strike. In a strike, of course, the union calls on the members to stop work in order to apply pressure to their employees to meet the demands for either higher wages or better working conditions on the factory or in a job. So sometimes you may hear about union strikes, and that's been coming up lately in the news as well recently, where a lot of unions have been striking because they want to improve their wages and have better working conditions. So that's where trade unions or unions, labor unions, came in. All right, so this is your turn to apply it. You're going to use this map right here, right? This is about industry in Great Britain. And also you're going to use this chart, which is talking about the population shift in Europe, to answer the guided questions in your guided notes and in Edpuzzle. So go ahead and start on that, and I will see you in the next video. Doodles!